I live in Cologne, Germany, and the events on New Year's Eve kept me pretty upset. We moved here with my wife and kids to raise my little daughter in peace and security. As a libertarian, I was always aware of what was going on, but the last 12 months completely changed the country I used to know. However, if I decide to leave this country, where should I go? Besides the fact that it'll be hard to convince my wife to leave her family and friends behind, you must understand that Germans tend to be very attached to the place they live. It's not easy to move your whole life, especially after you settled with a house and kids. Furthermore, I think I remember you arguing for libertarians not to run, but to stay where they are and to try and make society better where they live. How do you achieve that when this place is going to hell in a handbasket? That's from Frank.
Good question, Frank. How are you doing tonight?
Hi, thank you. I'm fine. Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. Now, the events in Cologne, for those who don't know, is that there were 1,000 plus German women grabbed, sexually assaulted, one or two were raped, and this was to some degree suppressed by the German media until it sort of erupted in social media. And what is the status now? Is it being reported on fairly well? Is it still a topic of conversation, or has it gone down the memory hole?
Well, it depends on what side you look at. If you look at the social media, especially with that Facebook algorithm, and Facebook knows what you're looking for, and you maybe look into smaller newspapers, so your newsfeed scatter with these messages. It's just flooded. I know actually. No, let me rephrase that. I don't know any libertarian anymore not blending out this amount of news of women getting groped, harassed, violated, actually little boys too, in Germany and Austria. So this is, well, it's impossible to keep it under the rock. On the other hand, the mainstream media, I hardly follow that anymore. But from what I hear and what I read here and there, it's reported once or twice, but actually it's more the usual cheering of how great we are doing and that we should continue with this path and we shouldn't be all Nazis, and basically it's the politicians tend to, or they changed their habit and started insulting the population. So that's where we are right now.
Right. So anyone who has doubts about the value of importing 1 million plus third world inbred, relatively low IQ Muslims is considered to be a racist and a Nazi and a bad person, and should basically just shut the hell up and submit. Is that right?
That's about right, because it is a hard topic. I know it is a hard topic, and I don't know where to start it, because immigration. This country has seen a lot of immigration, and there I recall, maybe it was you, a show of yours with a Swedish guy, and he was actually Iranian descent, I guess, or Persian, and he said there are several waves of immigration: the first wave, second wave, third wave, and it's more or less the same here. So there are a lot of migrants, you can call them, which are totally shocked from what is happening here and what kind of people we are importing. And the other day I went to ride the tram, and I overheard right beside the tram station is a bus station, and I overheard Turkish bus drivers, 50-ish and working their whole life, first generation, and they talked about those events and said, okay, the Germans, you can do everything with them. They just, how do you say that? They just won't fight back or fight the politicians as long as they have their car parked in front of their house. This is actually one Turkish bus driver talking to another one. The rest of the conversation I couldn't understand, because he was changing from German to Turkish, and I don't speak Turkish. So that's...
well, what does it mean when they say when the car is parked in front of the house?
It just means, it means as long as in very, very, very small places, really personally attacked, then you just, I don't know, you try to ignore it, or you believe the media. It's hard to say. There's this guy from a local pop group, and his daughter got molested the other day, actually 2 or 3 days ago, and he still thinks that we shouldn't be all Nazis. So there's a father which has a molested daughter, and his political correctness is keeping him from, I don't know, be angry at some point.
Right.
It's hard for me to express because now it's a difficult topic, and it is a very great topic to divide the population, just to rule them better. And it's a difficult topic for libertarians because in a perfect world, who needs borders? Who needs countries anyway? But like the things are, the people are, either from the left or from the right, calling for a strong state and for, I don't know, use your borders, make a border control. And so I'm very aware that you cannot say, okay, this is all bullshit, and we shouldn't give asylum to anyone who is seeking it. It's how do you say that? It's just plain madness. When I wrote you, I thought about phrasing this: how to stay sane in an insane world, because I just cannot cope with the events anymore. I've lived here all my life, and I celebrated the 2000 New Year's Eve in Cologne. Actually, I crossed that place where that happened, and Cologne, I don't know, usually there are 2 million in this city, so it's a city of 1 million population, and 1 million is coming in and out, and in the state is living 18 million people, and on that New Year's Eve, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 million people in the city, and they were all partying, and it was, New Year's Eve of the year 2000, you had fireworks going for hours. And the worst thing that happened to me is that I took my girlfriend, and I was afraid that I couldn't get a great place to watch the fireworks correctly. That's the worst thing that happened to me. And you see, this is a bit different now.
Right. What does your wife think?
Well, what does my wife think? She is afraid, actually. And I talk about all this stuff with her, and it kept me more awake. I'm more aware of that, and maybe I get paranoid. That's the other thing I'm thinking about. So maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe all the news.
No. Listen, Frank. Listen. The reason that it's worrying you more than it's worrying your wife is because you're a man. And you and I and everybody else with balls knows who is going to have to fight should it come to that. Are they going to send your wife out, or are they going to send you out? It's your job to worry about these things because it's largely going to affect you, at least first. That's your genetics, right? That's the genetics of being male, is you have to worry about interlopers, right?
Yes, and so it's boiling down actually to a fight to some degree, and you are of course totally right. And now I'm a father. I have a daughter. She is 1 year and 1 month old, and she is just gorgeous. And this changed my life, and I am the one responsible. I'm not only the one responsible for her having a house, having to eat, having a great place to stay, but I'm responsible for her security. And as a German, I'm just totally unarmed, and the state, which is supposedly, I don't know, protecting me, all I hear from that state is actually insults to their own population. I cannot, actually, I saw Twitter feeds of the Minister of Justice and other officials calling scum. So it is it's hard to phrase in words, especially in the middle of the night here, but it's in broad daylight, it's even hard to phrase in words. And well, that led to that question: what should I do? I'm here, I'm unarmed, I have a family, I actually have a nice place. I moved away from the city in the suburbs to, well, it is peacefully or more peacefully, and trying to raise a little child. And if I go, where should I go? If I stay, what should I do? So there's this philosopher, Peter Sloterdijk. He's sometimes in the media, very rarely, and he said, he had this quote telling, okay, if you are not a social democrat, which is actually very left in Germany, you either leave or you you go mad. And I'm trying to avoid this, and that's actually one of the reasons why I called in.
Right. And what is you said you have family there. I assume that's your wife's family and your family. And what do they think of these events?
Well, actually, my mother is thinking the same. She turned on her old days. I might say she turned to a full-blown libertarian, which is okay. But she starts to be very afraid. Also, she lives even further abroad, far away from cities. I think my father is actually ignoring it, more or less. And the family of my wife is, well, how shall I put it? Oh, actually, I had some clash with the father of her because he's more mainstream than me, to put it this way. And so we decided some time ago not to talk about the political issues anymore because it just doesn't work out that way. So, what are people saying? People try just to go on and somehow avoid this. But as I talked with my mother-in-law, I said in October or September, I don't know, I said, okay, you are importing 1 million people from different countries here. And despite the best intentions, I don't know, even it's 1 million surgeons, you will have trouble because it's just 1 million people. And you and I know it's not 1 million very civilized persons. So what do you think is going to happen? And now we're here.
Sorry, were you just about to finish a thought? I'm not sure if I dropped you.
Yeah, well, actually, she didn't answer my question because it was a rhetorical question, and she didn't say anything, my mother-in-law. And I haven't spoken to her since. So actually, I feel a bit also left alone with this topic. Of course, I have friends I can talk about or chat with some guys online. But to see this immediate danger or seeing how things changed, it's hard. It's a difficult topic to talk about. So right. I have no. If you talk to people in private and off the record, they tend to agree with you. But if it gets more official or big around, they tend to silence up. Actually, I know a lot of people who lived in the old East Germany, under the communist regime, and they all say the same. It is worse than it has been under a communist regime because back in the days, everybody knew what the media was giving out as news. It was bullshit, and they had this feeling about, it's us against them up there. And nowadays, it's not that easy anymore because a lot of people still believe the media, and a lot of people think what we are doing is a good thing because they want to be humanitarian, which you can't argue with, which is a noble cause. But it's not only that,
Well, I mean, this question of humanitarianism is obviously important, and it is a weakness of Europeans, of Caucasians, this pathological altruism. Pathological altruism is a very soft form of cultural suicide. And pathological altruism is something where if it's your known group of people, your a tribe, your group, it doesn't have to be racial, it can be cultural, it can be philosophical. If it's your in-group, then there's nothing that you wouldn't do for your daughter. There's nothing that I wouldn't do for my daughter, my wife, my friends. If it's my group, then there's no limit to my humanitarianism, my generosity, self-sacrifice, whatever you want to call it. And because white people have been verbally abused out of having any collective self-interest, what's happened is the in-group preference shown by just about every other ethnic group and by women and so on, by Democrats, the in-group preference has been cracked and broken for white males, and therefore the self-sacrifice, the altruism, the humanitarianism of white males has spilled out across the whole world. It is no longer restrained by in-group preferences. It is now for everyone. And the reasons for all of that are sort of complex, and we've gone into them in a number of presentations. But that aspect of being humanitarian is how do you say no to it? How do you say no to it? Oh, the funny thing is, you say no to it in the same way that all of the countries in the Middle East, all of the Muslim countries are saying no to it. You know, like you first, right? You go to Saudi Arabia, go to Qatar, go to all these countries and say, well, you first. You take them in, you integrate them, show us how it's done. We'll take a generation and see how it's working out for you. But this idea is that when people come to Europeans or to North Americans, and in particular to whites, and they come and they say, these people are in need, you must help them. It has become almost impossible for white people to say no. And the reason for that, of course, is because this great fiction of racial egalitarianism has been so pushed on, and really it's only been the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. If you look at libertarian writings in the 60s, there's a fair, decent consciousness about what's called race realism, or taking the biological facts about race and accepting them as a reality. So it really has been like 50 years or so where the race, this is the basic principle and the basic premise that works. All races, all ethnicities, all cultures are equal. There's no difference. If there is any perceivable difference, that difference is 100% environmental. 100% environmental. So there are no biological differences between any ethnicities. Where any aggregate differences show up among ethnicities, the difference is entirely environmental. And those two principles, there's no difference biologically, therefore any collective differences must be entirely environmental. Those two basic arguments combine together so that anyone who does not want another ethnicity coming into the environment that they live in can only be motivated by irrational bigotry. And this fundamental reality, or this fundamental sequence of thought is something that is very hard for people to push back on. If you accept all ethnicities are biologically identical and the only differences that show up in aggregate must be due to environment, then it's crazy to not want people to come into your environment. Now, there's other arguments, even if you accept all that, there are other arguments for pushing back against mass migration from third world countries or cultures. But those two basic principles are very foundational. And it really doesn't take much thought, even if you don't want to study the biology, the IQ differences, and the differences in aggression that, we talked about this in The Truth About Crime, the warrior gene prevalence among the black population and so on. Even if you cast all of that aside, And you go to, and this argument comes from the left because it's all economic determinism, right? The third worlders only have the characteristics they have because of their place in relationship to the means of production, right? Because they have a particular relationship to the capital, to the economy. And so if you take them from the third world and put them in the first world, they will very quickly become like first worlders, and therefore the only reason you wouldn't want to do so is because of racism and so on. But it really is a ridiculous argument because it's sort of like saying, well, if you take Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders and you somehow force them into the Republican Party, then within a couple of years, they'll be full-throated 100% Republicans. And that is, I mean, anybody who thinks about that just for a moment would recognize that that is a ridiculous proposition. Islam, well, of course, 1,400 years ago started and very quickly, within 100 years, spread wildly across the Middle East. And when Islam went to new countries, they did not become like the people in those new countries. They dominated, and Muhammad was rather famous for giving the convert or die commandment, or live as a sort of subjugated third-class citizen. And so when Islam went to other countries, it did not assimilate, it dominated. And you can just ask the Hindus in Pakistan for how that all went. And the leftists know very much that you have to keep a monoculture in order to keep a belief system going, which is why leftists, when they take over universities, they no longer allow right-wing people very much to get into those universities. And when they take over a newspaper, they don't allow non-left-wing people into the editorial staff or the board. So as soon as the leftists come in, they kick out everyone who's not a leftist, and they won't hire anyone except a leftist. And so they don't sit there and say, well, let's get Phyllis Schlafly in here. She's an American conservative who's in her 80s. Let's get Phyllis Schlafly in here because after she's been here for a year or two or three, she'll be just like us, right? They keep those people away from the media, from the movie making, from the novel writing, from the publishing companies, from the academics, everything that they are striving in to take over. They don't let other cultures come in to their monoculture because they know that it's not going to work, that it's going to be lots of conflict, lots of battles, and no one's going to change their minds. So the leftists who say to everyone, oh, you know, it's all environmental, just let them in and they'll be just like you, they're the same leftists who fiercely defend all of the centers of power that they take over and keep everyone who's not a leftist out. And that hypocrisy is something that you just have to look at that basic reality, which everybody knows about. At least everyone who's educated has been through all of the government schools and government-run or government-controlled higher education. They know this sort of monomania, and they know it from the media and so on, right? Like the Spiegel is not bringing in a whole bunch of anti-immigration people and saying, well, they're really great writers, they just happen to not agree with us on immigration, but don't worry, after they've been at Der Spiegel for a year or two, they'll be just like us, right? And so the fact is that these people who say we welcome a diversity of opinion are shitty little totalitarians insofar as they're working. Mark Zuckerberg is working with Angela Merkel to shut down dissent on Facebook. And you can get visits from the police in many places in Europe if you post things anti-immigrant or skeptical of these African migrants coming into your country en masse. So, yeah, let me just finish and then I'll shut up. But they are petty little totalitarians. They have no interest in diversity of opinion. Those on the left have had soul-crushing monomania for public discourse ever since the left basically came around in its modern form in the mid to late 19th century, which is why there's no freedom of speech in communist countries, and why in socialist countries, and as Lenin said, the goal of socialism is communism, there is a repression of dissent. So all the people who say, well, are you against diversity? It's like, well, why can we not have a public debate about this? Well, you can't have a public debate about this because the left has no facts. The left has only a verbal abuse to pour upon people, so they can't have information and facts and biology and reality and brain size and IQ and cultural history and inbreeding and genetics and religious intolerance and theocracy and no separation of church and state, like all of the things that are going to come in that are problematic. They can't discuss those because those are facts, and it's a lot easier to just scream verbal abuse at people and call them a Nazi and a fascist and a racist than it is to actually deal with any facts. And so this aspect of things is really clear, that the left, which promotes diversity, is not even remotely interested in diversity. They're interested in a one-size-fits-all mental straitjacket where dissent is crushed through verbal abuse and the power of the state. It's the same totalitarian impulse that the West has been fighting ever since they made Socrates drink some hemlock. So I sympathize with where you're coming from. It is an old battle. And, as Ben Shapiro says, the left never sleeps, right? They're continually working on this stuff. And the challenge, of course, is that the left want to control people, whereas free market people want to go out and actually get something done with their lives. So the left, because they want to control people, are continually focused, and their survival depends upon the control of people, so they never stop what they're doing. Whereas everyone else, you're a dad, you've got a job, you're a husband, you've got stuff to do. Whereas the left is this all they focus on, is this spreading out these memes to control and humiliate and bully and abuse other people. And so, when you've got someone focused 12 hours a day on a task and someone else who can barely spare half an hour a day to rebut it, it's just a matter of time until the people with less time to allocate to the conflict tend to find their support eroding. So that's sort of at least the beginning of the introduction. There's other things I want to talk about, but I want to get your thoughts on what I've said.
Okay, great. So if there are other things you want to talk about, just ask me. But a lot of things came up, and just to stick to my question, if I stay here, let's just stick with that for a second. How do I fight this fight? Because it's on all frontiers. Because as an anarcho-capitalist, I wasn't too much fond of the state anyway, and I'm not too surprised to see it break its rules. But what happened, we talked about this Facebook, this specific Facebook task force, which our Attorney General forced Facebook into, which is sitting right in Berlin, and actually employs former members of the how do you say that? Secret Service.
Stasi, the German secret police, East German secret police, right?
Secret German police. He takes your taxpayer money and uses to censor the Attorney General completely against every rule in the book there is from this state. And he does it in the blink of an eye. And he's not even a great guy. He's not like a great politician, just evil. He's a was basically, just Merkel's hand puppet, and he's able to pull this off. And the media coverage on this is, well, let me put it this way: if there's a train accident, it'll be more over the media than this. So this country and this continent, I said that a long time ago, but this is obvious, very clear. This is right now a totalitarian regime. It's a socialistic, communistic, or you can call it fascistic. I don't know. I don't care. But it's far from the rule of law, like many minarchists talking. We are living in some sort of totalitarian regime again. And if you ever ask yourself how, the Nazis could happen, and you ask that yourself as a German, you ask that a lot. If you ever ask yourself how East Germany and the communism could happen, you ask that a lot too. We are right back there. And so this is one line of defense you have to put up, because the state is incredible. It's not just insulting their own people, it's actually fighting against you. You are a citizen of second class. Actually, I have some things happening to me, and I have there are other there are other the so-called refugees are free to use the public transportation, including the trains. And so what do? They go to the first class, because, if it's free of charge, why not take a journey in style? While you sit there and pay a lot of money just to use a train. And so you are actually a citizen of second class. And this is not just one example. There are a ton of examples, and some examples I exclusively know of which happened before. This is not all so much news. It's just, boiling up. It's just coming to, I don't know, to some. It's getting faster. So the lane to the catastrophe is just getting faster. And actually, I don't know where it's leading to.
Yes, you do. Yeah, you do. You do. You know where it's leading to, right? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, what I said is going to happen is a civil war, actually.
Yeah. They're not going to assimilate. They're not going to assimilate. And this is not just me guessing. This is very clear evidence from history that particularly racially disparate groups don't assimilate. I mean, blacks and whites have been trying to work on this hundreds of years off and on in various forms in America. And when blacks and Hispanics move into a neighborhood, what happens to the white people?
They leave.
They leave.
Yeah. And that's what I did. I left the big city because big cities, okay, that's okay. So I move here, and actually we rent a house because my wife is a doctor, and I'm academic too, and I freelance. I make good money, but we you know how it is with the economy and the real estate prices. We cannot afford a house. That's because there's nothing left to buy because the money is worthless. That's basically it. Okay, so we rent a house. And I put some work in this house anyway, so also it's rent because we cannot afford something great new. So I put work into this house, and when I come back from work and I go to work into the house and do some, build some walls and do stuff, I find a little sheet of paper in my mailbox informing me, the governor of this small town here in the suburbs of Cologne is informing me that the local, gymnasium, it's from a school, where they do sports and stuff, 200 meters from here, will not be longer used from the school anymore. They will put up a refugee camp over there, 200 meters from where I'm standing right now. And he's not actually asking you if you agree, because you pay with your tax dollars with it, or your taxpayer money. He's just informing you that it'll be, from now on until further notice, a home for some refugees, so-called refugees. I call them, how do you say that, asylum seekers. So that's the private challenge. You have the challenge, the state's challenging you. Your private life is being challenged, and then of course you have your social life being challenged because this refugee topic was very hot, and a lot of people, especially young people, volunteered. And there's this great interview with Rahim Tagadan in some local German libertarian magazine. There is actually one. And he is actually an Austrian philosopher living in Vienna. So he's an Austrian in Austria. And he said a very clever thing. He said, okay, these are quite rich teenagers or young adults, and they've been brought up and they have been given everything, and now they could do, for the first thing in their life, they could do something which they thought meant something. When all this started, we had these teenagers and young adults standing at the train stations with refugee welcome signs and all that stuff, and helping out and collecting clothes and giving food to them. Also, this all was already provided, but so this is how social life is also, woven into this fabric. So you have a lot of ground to cover to defend yourself about this overwhelming attack on all sides. And like you said, or I think you said, you should once in a while, as a libertarian, you shouldn't just move away. You should stand and make the best out of your life. But I just repeat my question, just not to be annoying. How should I do
No,
that?
I get it, and I'll get to that. I haven't forgotten it, but I've just for other people, I have to be aware because of all our new subscribers that a lot of people are going to be listening to this with no context, no history. Race egalitarianism, in other words, all races are the same, and the only differences are environmental, has become a religion, and people die for religions. People will go to the wall, and many people who've adapted to a particular fantasy will choose death over the destruction of that fantasy. We can see this, of course, in wars. People will volunteer to protect the state that has oppressed them and will literally walk into machine gun fire rather than challenge the assumption of the virtue of the state. And people will choose death over the destruction of their illusions. The destruction of illusions for most people is a kind of soul or spiritual or character death that they would rather die than face. And this is the big challenge with the modern world, which is that this race egalitarianism has become such a foundational aspect of decisions that have been made since, at least in America, since the 1960s, since 1965, when the vast majority of immigrants to America by design were white Europeans, and now it's down to like virtually nothing, and the vast majority of immigrants who are coming in are third worlders, Muslims, and so on. And this, of course, once you lay the foundation that all the races are the same, then the only reason you wouldn't want a race coming in is because you're a racist. And this screaming down of every and any biological fact that clearly shows that the races which diverged 50,000 years ago and went into wildly different climates in Siberia, Africa, you can't. So there's this idea that the races which biologically diverged 50,000 years ago can just be reintegrated. Sorry, go ahead.
Just give you a small example. You don't have to go to Siberia. Actually, there was some German king, a long time ago, sent a group of people to claim a very mountainous area and to form a special population. And actually, they did and formed what is nowadays called Switzerland. So I think the German king didn't have in mind that they form their own country, but it's you can have this on a very small scale. This is a tiny country compared to Canada or the United States, and actually you go, I don't know, half an hour, and you have a different type of dialect, and you go an hour and you're in a different country. So yes, people are different, very different, and they like to be different. Actually, I talk with some of my friends, and not just to cut you off too long, and I made the argument, from Hans Hermann Hoppe to that secession is good, and that we should form smaller units. The smaller, the better. And he came up with some paper. I just managed to read the abstract. That they made the paper was about Switzerland too, and about conflict and not conflict. And it boils down to borders of any kind, not state borders necessarily, but are natural, and the more the smaller the units are, and the more plain or clear your border is, the less conflict there is in between even these different groups. So yes, you don't have to go to Siberia. You just have to take, I don't know, a car and drive 2 hours through Europe, and you'll see immediately why this is true.
Okay. But I'm talking more about visible racial differences. So the analogy which I'll deploy here is the brown bear and the polar bear, right? Okay. to take some obvious examples. Of course, polar bears have adapted to life in the snow, which is why their skin is white. It allows them to avoid being seen by the seals and rabbits or whatever the hell they prey on up there. And that has taken quite some time to evolve that way. It may have been fast, may have been slow, but it's a ways. And there's other things, right? The capacity to hibernate for a long period of time, where they lose like massive portions of body fat and so on. I know that the bears also hibernate, but they're not going to lose quite as much because the temperatures aren't as bad. So you have brown bears and you have polar bears. Now, this is where people get messed up, because they think that if the facts are that the races are different, that this has something to do with a race being superior or inferior. And that is a biologically incomprehensible and ridiculous and prejudicial statement. Which is better, a polar bear or a brown bear? Which bear is superior? Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? Now, if you take a brown bear and put it in the Arctic, it's inferior because it's in the wrong environment. If you take a polar bear and you put it in the woods, well, this big ghostly glowing white hide of it is going to have it show up fairly clearly to anything it's trying to hunt, and it's going to not do well because it's in the wrong environment. So saying that the races are different has nothing to do with saying that any race is superior or inferior. Who's better at living in Africa? Blacks. Who's better at living in Europe? Europeans. That's biology. That's the way that local adaptation to very, very widely disparate environments works, that you adapt to, why are people white? Because white people need more vitamin D, and if your skin is too dark, you won't get enough, you'll get rickets and you'll die. So that's sort of one example. So it's got nothing to do with superiority or inferiority, just adapted to local standards and local environments. Now, if you take a whole bunch of brown bears and put them in the Arctic, they're going to fail. Generally, it's not going to work out very well for them. In the same way, if you take a whole bunch of polar bears and you put them in a forest, they're going to fail. Now, how long is it going to take to adapt? How much pain, how much difficulty, how much danger, how many premature deaths are going to have to happen for the adaptation to occur? Well, it's a lot, and it's gruesome. But the way that it kind of works is you take the polar bear and you put it in the woods, so North European woods, and what happens is the polar bear doesn't succeed in the woods because the woods are, the brown bear has adapted to the woods. And so what happens is the polar bears who don't succeed in the woods start screaming at the brown bears that the brown bears are racist against the polar bears, and that the only reason the polar bears are not succeeding is because the brown bears are holding them down or keeping them down. It's not the fact that they're in the wrong environment relative to their genetic adaptation, that the brown bears are just anti-white hair bigots. And therefore, the brown bears owe the polar bears food, right? So for every berry you pick, I've got to have half. For everything that every root you dig up, or I don't know what do they eat, rabbits, grizzlies or something. So for everything that you kill or everything that you get that you can eat, you've got to give us half to atone for your anti-polar bear bigotry, your anti-polar bear racism. And of course, what happens is that if the brown bears accept this and say, well, I guess the only difference is the color of our fur, and therefore your lack of success must be our fault. Well, that must be, they're going to hand over all of these resources, which is going to prevent any further adaptation from the polar bears to the local environment, because they're getting resources without having to adapt to the local environment. So listen, without the welfare state, without the forced redistribution of income, come one, come all. When people are allowed to be with groups that they want, to not be with groups that they don't like, when incompatibilities are allowed to be expressed through voluntary association, fine, great, no problem. If the polar bears want to make a go for it in the woods, or the brown bears want to make a go for it in the snow, okay, I'm not going to shoot them, right? Go and give it, it may not probably work out, but, give it a shot. See how it works out for you. But once you have this forced redistribution of income, you are setting the stage for a brutal kind of civil war. So diversity plus proximity plus the state equals civil war. And, I was just reading about South Korea. South Korea, one of the richest places in the world, 99+% ethnic homogeneity. I mean, I can't imagine if you're a South Korean, you wake up in the morning, you say, man, if we had 1 million Muslims here, our society would be so enriched. It would be, if they couldn't speak the language, if they came from a tradition entirely hostile to our culture, and if they had tried repeatedly to invade, destroy, and subjugate South Korea, let's just invite a whole bunch of them in. I mean, who would wake up in South Korea and run on that platform? It would make no sense whatsoever. So even if we want to deny the IQ differences and the cultural differences, biological differences, and religious differences and so on, you just have to ask the Germans around you, what's in it for you? Like, why are whites and white males the only group who are never allowed to ask, what's in it for me? Why would I want to give my money to Muslims rather than save it for my own children? I don't see the Muslims saying, hey, here's a whole bunch of free oil, white people, because we don't want to accumulate any value and resources and capital for ourselves. Here's all this free oil. Like, holy shit, how cucked up did we become that we are dealing with a group that regularly, in the 70s, what did I remember from the Muslims in the 70s? Well, then the Saudi and the OPEC and so on. Holy shit. They jacked up the price of oil and virtually decimated Western economies because they wanted to make a killing. Okay, so and they never said, oh, I'm so sorry, that was a really, really terrible thing to do. Why have Westerners become so cucked in the butt that they will extend massive amounts of civilization and culture and economy destroying, quote, charity to groups that have not shown the barest charitable impulse, in fact, an exploitive and predatory impulse towards Europeans, not only throughout history and distant history, but recent history and in the present. And I don't know, this real politics side has got to be reaffirmed at some point or another.
Well, this politics is one problem. Okay, so the answer I got to that question one time was, well, it's just dumb luck that we were born here and they were born over there, so they have the right to be here. That's an honest answer I got once.
What the hell sense does that make? Listen, hot girls are more likely to sleep with hot guys. Right? Is that a fair thing to say? When everyone's young and dumb.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Okay. So, Danny DeVito, I don't know, whoever is considered to be a not that hot guy. Great actor.
Yeah.
But Danny DeVito happened to be born short, bald, and with a tendency to portliness, right? Now, it's not Danny DeVito's fault that he was not born looking like Brad Pitt. It's not his fault. So he should get as sexy a set of women as Brad Pitt got in his prime. Or Zac Efron, or, Julian Assange, for that matter, who seemed to be quite a chick magnet. So it's not his fault. Not the fault of the short, bald, fat, ugly guy that he was not born tall, lustrous-haired, and handsome. So women should be lining up to surrender themselves to his groping embraces because it's not his fault. He just happened to be born that way. I mean, it's not my fault I wasn't born with the voice of Freddie Mercury, so everyone should give me a recording contract. It's not my fault. It's like, what conceivable sense does any of this make? I mean, this is where people were born. And if it's any consolation, the higher intelligence of the Ashkenazi Jews, of the East Asians, and of the Caucasians came about because of ridiculous levels of suffering where less intelligent people tended to get wiped out by eating their seed crop during the winter. So, they happen to be born over there and we happen to be born here. Okay, well, we got battle-hardened to high intelligence because of ridiculous amounts of environmental obstacles to taking our next goddamn breath. So they were lucky to be born over there because they faced much less of a death sentence from the environment than happened to be born in Northern Europe or Siberia or other places, or facing the persecutions that the Jews faced through a lot of their history. So I don't know, this idea that it was just dumb luck that, it's like, God, I mean, what's that? There is a great variety in how people are born and where people are born and so on. The idea that you're then going to use the power of the state to somehow try and remediate this. Okay, when they pass a law saying hot guys when they pass a law saying hot women have to bang Danny DeVito, okay, then I'll start to think that people are taking this seriously. But other than that, I just assume it's just complete lefty bullshit.
Okay, so to take that further, well, now I lost the question.
Okay, let me finish up with where I think things are going to go, and then we'll talk about what might be a worthwhile thing to do. Okay, so let us speak frankly now, for the hour is getting late. To prey upon people, you must first force feed them delusions when they're children, right? To reap the reward of them giving you tithes, you must force feed them with the delusion of religiosity when they're children. To force people or to profit from people's sense that they owe the state taxes, you must fill them full of statist propaganda when they're children so that they feel like they're paying their fair share or whatever it is. So once you stuff people with delusions are the manure from which the flower of exploitation tends to grow. And societies have this constant tension between the rulers want you to be deluded enough that you voluntarily transfer goods, resources, young, health, wealth, and charity to the rulers. And so because more and more people always want to rule, the push away from reality from the ruling classes, and by that I don't just mean the aristocracy or the clergy, but also I mean the people on welfare, the people in the military-industrial complex, everyone who is preying upon the body politic, which in America now is about half the population at a minimum. So more and more, once you get this crop of deluded people who cough up resources in order to maintain the fragility of their egos based upon their delusions, once you have that crop, you get, you throw out a handful of corn, you're going to get a sky full of crows. And so when you get this system set up, more and more people want to prey on the makers, right? The takers want to prey on the makers, and the takers are interested in sowing delusion into the minds of the makers so that the makers feel guilty if they're not handing over resources to the takers. So this is why societies continually get pushed further and further away from reality, because you need more and more predation. And this is why you can see in the West this addiction to unreality, which is driven by verbal abuse and the isolation that comes from this, right? Anybody who now speaks the truth in Europe stands to be socially isolated, to lose their career, to maybe even lose their family, to maybe even lose their freedom if they speak wrong to the cops who might come by. And so because delusion is how human beings are preyed upon, and you constantly have more and more people who want to prey on the diminishing set of makers in society, the people who are actually producing something, the propaganda to drive people further into the foggy caves of delusion continues. And then people end up, like the society ends up so far away from any kind of reality that it collapses. And so that's where Europe and the West and whites are at the moment, that they're so preyed upon. And unlike the Asians and the Ashkenazi Jews, who basically say, screw you, we're not interested in being preyed upon, there is this pathological altruism for a variety of reasons going through the white population. And so they're continually being driven further and further away from reality so that they can be exploited more and more and more. And this will continue until one of two things happen. Either we use philosophy to push back against the delusions, or we simply conform and cock our heads and bow and scrape and beg and plead for another 5 minutes of freedom until everything collapses and the men are herded off to fight some sort of civil war. These are the only two possibilities in my mind that can occur going forward. So what is it that you should do? I think recognize that basic fact. And you have to talk about, however uncomfortable it may make you. And I'm not talking about, forget Facebook, God, forget that. I mean, it's in your personal relationships that these realities have to come up in. And if libertarians had been talking about what's called race realism, if they hadn't dropped the ball and become race egalitarians, then they would have done a fantastic service to the survival of Western civilization. But generally, they tend to be in the pro-immigrant, everyone's the same nonsense by ignoring basic facts of biology, reality, and evolution. And so we just need to keep bringing up this information and say, look, these people are a standard deviation below us in IQ, and nobody knows how to fix it. right? That's all that needs to be said. On average, right, these people are a standard deviation below Europeans, white Europeans in IQ. And nobody knows how to fix it. Nobody knows how to fix it. And the estimates are 50 to 80% genetics. And they also have, how on earth are they going to integrate if there's biology behind this IQ difference if their religion says you can't marry outside the religion? I mean, that's not going to work. And people, of course, they do get confused because, recently I was talking about the lower IQs that are recorded in Iran. And some people got upset. Oh, these measurements were taken from the 50s. It's like, okay, well, fine, and so instead of what it was low 80s, it's low 90s, so give them 10 points or whatever. But what happens is when it comes to judging immigrants in a relatively free society, well, the first people who come over are fantastic. Of course they are, because they're the smartest people in that entire society. It's sort of like if you're a Hollywood casting agent, relatively high up, like you're casting blockbuster movies and so on, you're not seeing the Mike Browns of the American society, of the black society. You're seeing the cream of the crop, right? 20% of American blacks are smarter than the average white. And so you're seeing, in a sense, the Dr. Souls of the acting world. And so every black that you interact with is smart and ambitious and funny and together and, probably have all of the associated, long-term stable marriages that go along with the higher intelligence. And so because you're exposed to those people, you say, well, I can't imagine why blacks aren't succeeding as a whole because all the blacks I know are fantastic. Well, okay, fantastic. We've had a lot of blacks call into this show and I've really enjoyed the chance with them. They're great people to chat with. And so that when you get immigrants coming first wave, they're the smartest, they're the cream de la creme. But that doesn't represent the entire population as a whole. And of course, people say, well, since the 50s, I'm sure that the Iranian IQ has gone up. Not sure it has. Might have gone down. Might have gone down for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is that, since the early 1980s, which I guess is close to a generation and a half or 2 generations now, depending on how it's measured, well, you've had fundamentalist Islam in charge of the country, which is not exactly an encouragement to high IQ, skeptical, scientific style reading patterns.
Very easy. Every intelligent Iranian who couldn't make it out alive of this country is either here or in Sweden. So and having a shop or doing something for living. I can tell you that.
So, and I don't know what the entire depopulation the entire depopulation proportion of the Iranian country was, but let's say that the top 5 or 10% of the smartest people left the country. Okay. So you've just decapitated the gene pool of the most intelligent people for the most part. And the most intelligent people, in a theocracy, less intelligent people, more brutal people tend to thrive, which is one of the reasons why there's not been much of a reformation in Islamic societies for, the past almost millennia and a half. Because lower IQ people tend to be more religious. And in a theocracy, lower IQ people end up at the top of the food chain, which is why lower IQ people love theocracy because they succeed in a way that they wouldn't in a more secular society. And so I would argue that there's pretty good reasons to believe that the Iranian population on average would probably have a lower IQ, given that the high IQ outliers of 5 or 10% of the population have all fled the country since the 1980s or even before. And so what happens is the Iranians come over and people are like, wow, these guys are fantastic. Let's have more. And it's like, this is not a cross-representational sample of the society as a whole. And that, of course, what's happening in Europe is now receiving all of the people who never had the smarts, the ambition, the gumption, the opportunity, whatever you want to call it, to leave Africa over the past 100 years. All the people who were left behind in these countries as the smarter people had gone out and gotten to the West. So it is not a very good situation. And this, I will mention, though, I've mentioned it, of course, before, is that blood-related marriages are ridiculously common in Middle Eastern, in Islamic countries. And this has been known to, 8 to 10 to 15 to 17 IQ points, right? So on average, you could say close to a standard deviation drop in IQ, which puts you right in the middle of the highest criminal group highest criminality tends to be around IQ 85. Lower, and you don't tend to plan that much, and higher, you tend to recognize that criminality is not going to do you much good in your life. And so you have, of course, in Christianity, which has largely banned cousin marriages or blood-related marriages, you have that gene pool, not to mention all the 2% or whatever it is of Neanderthal DNA, which is supposed to have really helped Europeans advance in intelligence. You have a consanguine or blood-related gene pool coming in. 34% of all marriages in Algiers are blood-related, 46% in Bahrain, 33% in Egypt, 80% in Nubia, which is a southern area in Egypt, 60% in Iraq, 64% in Jordan, 64% in Kuwait, 42% in Lebanon, 48% in Libya, 47% in Mauritania, 54% in Qatar, 67%, more than two-thirds of marriages are blood-related in Saudi Arabia, 63% in Sudan, 40% in Syria, 39% in Tunisia, 54% in the United Arab Emirates, 45% in Yemen, and in Syria it is or was 40%. Iran, almost a third, 32.5%, almost a third of marriages in Iran are blood-related. That is crushing for the development of intelligence and causes a massive fallback to Stone Age levels, I would argue, of the capacity to reason. And so you have a group that is coming in that is a bunch of polar bears coming into a forest populated by brown bears. They're going to fail on average. There'll be some notable exceptions. Yes, Steve Jobs was the son of a Syrian, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I get it. There are exceptions, but so what? So what? So what? The reality is that en masse, they're going to fail. And because nobody's talking about the biological realities of why they're going to fail, what's going to happen is you're going to get into this vicious cycle where all failures of immigrant groups are blamed on white racism. All failures in immigrant groups are blamed on white racism. That's really bad for the whites because it leads to more stupid, pointless guilt and self-flagellation and gives more ammunition to the social justice warriors and all that. Why would you want that? Why would you want that? And second of all, you are importing, or I shouldn't say importing, but you are getting a whole bunch of people into your country. And it pains me to say all of this. I wish none of this were true, but we've got to grit our teeth and face reality or face the demise of civilization, because civilization is fundamentally predicated on valuing reality, reason, and evidence over all else. But this lower IQ group of genetically crippled people are going to come into European countries. They're going to fail, and bringing in hundreds of thousands of very low sexual market value Middle Eastern or North African or African men is a sure recipe for disaster. So, and no one's going to tell them the truth and going to say, well, look, you're a polar bear in a forest. It's not going to work out that well for you. You're not adapted to this environment, and your failures are not the fault of white people. Because, of course, if white people were so racist, then the Jews wouldn't be so much in prominence, and the East Asians wouldn't have higher incomes per capita than whites. No, the market, the free market, the remnants thereof, sorts relentlessly by intelligence. And unfortunately, and you can see this in average incomes for each ethnic group. It goes almost exactly along IQ lines. The highest Ashkenazi Jews, then East Asians, then whites, then Hispanics, then blacks, and Middle Easterners somewhere around somewhere between. So what's going to happen is you're going to have this very aggressive group of people with a relatively low IQ coming into your country, and the media is going to say, well, you're exactly the same as everyone here. The only reason you're not succeeding is those fucking white people are racists. Those fucking white people are goddamn bigots and racists, and they secretly hate you. And that's the only reason why you are failing. They're keeping you down. They're holding you down. They've got their boot on your neck. They refuse to hire you because they're bigoted, they're evil, they're racists. Nasty, vicious, tribal bigots. Oh, that's great. So not only is a low IQ, highly aggressive population coming into Europe, but the media is going to constantly pound this drumbeat and instigate them to hate everyone around them who's white. Oh, that's great. Nothing bad can come out of that. Constantly repeating to people, because there's this denial of race reality, constantly repeating to these people that the only reason they're not succeeding is the goddamn white people are racist bigots who hate them. Yeah, that's going to end well.
You are absolutely right. Just to make it short, I just read an article about, some German handball team just won the European Championship, and there was an article on an intellectual newspaper, and the guy was bragging about that this was not his victory because they were all Germans in that team, no migrants, and the only foreigner was the trainer, and he is from Iceland, and that doesn't count. So I could go on with dozens of those examples, but my question is, how does that come, or where does that come from? And I do not understand.
No, forget that. I'm sorry.
I do not understand.
Hang on. We already talked about the origins of it. I guess the final thing we need to talk about is what to do, right? Where to go. Okay. Frank, where are you going to go? Where are you going to go where this mad delusion is not all prevalent and all powerful?
Correct.
There's nowhere. Well, maybe Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe because, of course, they had the mad delusion of communism, and also they have enough historical realism to remember the degree to which Muslims were trying to take over their country over the past 1400, well, not quite 1400, but long time, many, many centuries. And so in Eastern Europe, there's a certain amount of race and cultural and religious realism that gives them some defense. Europe is starting to kick back, like they're starting to threaten Greece with economic isolation if Greece keeps letting all of these migrants go through Greece. So there is going to be some kickback in Europe. But where are you going to? You can't. I don't know where you can run to anywhere in Europe, right? I mean, you go to London. London is whites are a minority in London now. But where are you going to go where this delusion of all races are biologically identical and the only difference is environment and racism from white people? Where are you going to go in the world where you want to go where that's not going to be everywhere?
Yeah, well, so that's basically your argument. Try to stay put, try to argue with people, try to bring up the reasons, and somehow live through all of this. Did I get you correctly?
No, I just asked where can you go. I didn't give you anything else. Maybe there's someplace that maybe Iceland. I don't know. Maybe there is some place where this politically correct religion is not the theocracy we're all trapped in.
Yeah, the Polish are doing quite all right, but I have great Polish neighbors who came from Poland to work here, so they have their economical problem. New Zealand is a great place. I have a friend of mine who is living there, but it's the end of the world. You cannot immigrate very easily. And they came back because it was really, like they lived in Christchurch, and this was hit by earthquakes 5 years ago and still not built back up. So there's Australia left. So Australia and New Zealand is quite a stretch from here. So where do you go? That's a very tough question. And like I said, my wife is already complaining if she needs 45 minutes to car ride to go to her parents. So
listen, yeah. Frank. Look, yes. You need to start. We need to start leaning on women's love for us. Like, I'm sorry. Like, you need to start saying, look. I mean, if this, like Angela Merkel is saying, well, when the Middle East is stabilized, everyone should go back. Now, when is the Middle East going to be stabilized? Well, if we accept the biological arguments for racial differentiations, the answer is no time soon. But even if it were to happen tomorrow, do you think the migrants are going to want to go back? No, they've got a great gig in Germany. They get fantastic welfare benefits, free healthcare. They get, as you say, to travel first class. Well, why the hell would they want to go back to some mud hut in Africa? I mean, they're not going to want to go back. It's a lot easier to pour food coloring into water than to pull it out again, right? So they're not going to want to. They're not going to want to go back. And so either they're going to start kicking in doors and dragging people out and shipping them off, which is going to be horrendous and traumatizing and brutal. And of course, everyone's going to blame the people enforcing the rules rather than everyone who lied about biological compatibility between opposite cultures and ethnicities. But if it does continue to escalate, right, let's say that there's some big attack in Europe, right? I mean, we know that culturalization doesn't work because it was all second generation migrants who have been doing all of this. And let's say that there's some big attack in Europe, and the governments react as Europeans. You know, as I said before, British people, and this applies to a lot of Europeans, they're really, really nice until they're not. And that is, when the world hasn't seen that for a while, they forget that, you know, British people, there's a lot of Chamberlain trying to appease and trying to make peace and trying to avoid war. There's a lot of Chamberlain until there's Churchill, who will bomb the living shit out of you and make your grandchildren glow and be born with shrapnel in their spines. So with Europeans, there's a lot of accommodation, and we'll not have any in-group preferences, and we'll try our very best to make things go better until there's not. And so if there is going to be a big attack in Europe, or if something, either there's going to be a big attack in Europe, or there is going to be running out of money. There's no money, right? You can run out of money, and you know, the way that ethnic peace has been kept in America, and maybe this is the case in Europe as well, but the way that ethnic peace has been kept in America is through state redistribution of power. And when that runs out, right, when the welfare runs out and when the government has to cut back, like why doesn't the government in America want to cut government jobs? Because there are a lot of minorities in those government jobs, which is artificially propping up minorities' income. And if they fire a bunch of government workers, they'll be firing a whole bunch of minorities. And that, what's the point? Let's go on welfare or some other, you know, unemployment insurance, and that's true for all groups. But it is going to take a lot of money out of minority communities if the government cuts back on its employment of minorities. Particularly, why haven't they privatized the post office? Because a huge number of blacks work in the post office, and that would lower or consider to be bad for minorities. But eventually you run out of money. And when you run out of money, you start to get riots. You start to get all of this kind of stuff. Like what happens to these no-go zones, these Sharia-encased no-go biospheres of fairly chilly Middle Eastern countries in Europe? What happens when the welfare state runs out of money? Well, you're going to have uprisings, you're going to have lootings, you're going to have cars overturned, you're going to have like all kinds of god-awful stuff happening. And then what's going to happen? What's going to happen is the men are going to be called up to fight. And this is what men need to really get across to people. It's like, it's not, I don't, racist, I'd rather not think a goddamn thing about racism. And in a free society, you wouldn't really have to, right? But what I would like for people to do, yourself and everyone else, you go to your wife and say, oh, I'm sorry, is it inconvenient for you that we might have to move or might have to change where it is that we live? Well, it's going to be kind of inconvenient for me if I end up being drafted to find some god-awful door-to-door, no uniform civil war because there's been some attack or there are uprisings because the welfare gravy train is coming to an end, right? That's kind of like, at some point, men have to say, no, this is too risky for me. I'm not going to be a disposable male. I am not going to be somebody whose interests are going to be sacrificed until I have to supposed to sacrifice myself because nobody listened to me for many years. Who has the fine radar for coming war? Men. Why? Because men have biologically evolved that way, because men are the ones who are first thrown into the fires of war as if there's so many disposable lead soldiers. So you have to say to people, look, if there's going to be some significant conflict coming up, and it's most likely that there will be unless we act proactively, you know, you can say to the women, well, you are not going to be called up. You know, this idea that, especially, you know, young women, well, yeah, we're going to make them subject to the draft is like, well, they'll just go get pregnant, right? And then you won't be able to draft them, and there you go. So it is going to be men who are going to have to bear the brunt of this. And this is why, for me, you know, start calling on people's love. And if your wife is like, well, it's kind of inconvenient. Well, it's kind of inconvenient for me if there's a war, because a civil war, because I'm going to be the one who's going to be drafted. And so, maybe you can see your way past your own titular selfishness and look at what is actually going to be good for me. Now, the fact that you're living, 200 meters from a migrant area and you have a little girl, well, okay, she's very, very little. It's probably not a big problem yet. But, one of the challenging things about Islam, of course, is that Muhammad married a 9-year-old girl. The founder of the religion married a 9-year-old girl. Now, my understanding is that according to the stories, he did wait until she was 12 to consummate the marriage, to put it as nicely as humanly possible. But that's the founder of the religion. And a lot of people have a very tough time saying that what the founder of the religion did was abhorrent and immoral. And so until that reformation occurs, that is really a significant part of the Islamic faith, that this was the most morally perfect person who sexually penetrated a 12-year-old girl. So that is a challenge as your daughter grows older, and that would be something. You don't have to leave Germany, but I think being that close to a migrant center might not be the very best thing in the world. You mentioned a guy from Vienna. I'm sure you've read this story. It just came out a couple of days ago, that Austrian police have confirmed that an Iraqi refugee was arrested over the rape of a 10-year-old boy at a swimming pool in Vienna in December. He told the police he did it due to a, quote, sexual emergency, local media reported, citing the interrogation record. Chief Inspector Roman Haslinger said, a complaint was filed over the rape of a 10-year-old boy in a swimming pool. We determined the suspect is a 20-year-old man who lived in Vienna. He was arrested and later sent to such and such prison. The suspect is an Iraqi citizen who lives in Vienna and has refugee status. The attack took place in a swimming pool cubicle on December 2nd. The man, whose name has not been disclosed, dragged the boy into the changing room and assaulted him. After the boy told the lifeguard about what happened, the police were immediately called. They managed to apprehend the attacker in the pool, who, to their amazement, instead of fleeing the crime scene, was having fun by jumping from a 3-meter board. The boy suffered severe internal injuries and was admitted to a children's hospital. The perpetrator, who came to Austria via the Balkans on September 13th, confessed to the police he had acted because of a sexual emergency. When asked if such actions were legal in his home country, he admitted he knew that such acts were forbidden in any country of the world. Now, the mother has said that she regrets saying to her boy that the migrants are needy and should be given all the help that imaginable and so on. So, again, this is, of course, not to characterize everyone from the Middle East or all the migrants and so on, but this is not a hugely isolated incident, and these people are very traumatized as well, and trauma produces dysfunction in adults, particularly when it comes from a culture not wildly dedicated to self-knowledge. So, because all you are is you're talking about the inconvenience that some of your unease has to others. Well, I would say that they better start thinking about the inconvenience it might pose to you should push come to significant shove. Now, where to go? Where are you going to go? I mean, personally, I'm a stand and fight kind of guy, and I think that abandoning Germany at this point is premature. So I would say that it's probably worth standing and fighting, and the fighting is not on Facebook. The fighting is in your own personal relationships. It's hard for men to overcome our tendency to pathological altruism, self-sacrifice, and not having anyone else be inconvenienced by our preferences. Like I remember, I think I was in my early 30s, I think I was in a relationship with a woman, and I was just accommodating, and I just remember thinking at one point, like, wow, I really should have some of my own needs here. And I've talked about this, how a man's heart is murdered. The degree to which men are just there to accommodate others, don't upset people, particularly women, and all that. It is hard for men, and we've been very much socialized to not have our own needs and not have our own preferences. This idea that there's some sort of patriarchy where men get to do whatever they want and all of our needs are sacrificed is just a myth invented so people can legitimate their hatred of men. But I would say have your needs and talk about your concerns, and don't have people just talk you out of them. Say, no, this is important. And you can say it's important to me as opposed to you, who might be older or a woman, because you're not going to be called up. But if it does get as violent in Europe as it has been for 1,400 years in the Middle East, well, it's fine for you if you're not going to get called up. I can get why you're not worried about it. But how about being worried on my behalf? So I'm going to end with this poem called The Wrath of the Awakened Saxon by Rudyard Kipling. And this, of course, is about, I guess, slightly more of the British side of things. But this is an important thing for the world to remember. This is somebody who did know British culture and European culture very well. And I'm just going to move on to the next caller after this. But please keep us posted about what you decide, Frank. I'm certainly curious and I appreciate the conversation. So this is The Wrath of the Awakened Saxon. It was not part of their blood. It came to them very late, with long arrears to make good, when the Saxon began to hate. They were not easily moved, they were icy, willing to wait, till every count should be proved ere the Saxon began to hate. Their voices were even and low. Their eyes were level and straight. There was neither sign nor show when the Saxon began to hate. It was not preached to the crowd. It was not taught by the state. No man spoke it aloud when the Saxon began to hate. It was not suddenly bred. It will not swiftly abate. Through the chilled years ahead, when time shall count from the date that the Saxon began to hate. Now, you abuse a group long enough, the blowback is extraordinary and sudden and shocking and surprising. Like the guy who beats up his wife, who suddenly wakes up with his penis in the front yard and her looking shocked and stared at the bloody scissors in her hand. So those who make conversations impossible make escalation inevitable. And so I appreciate you calling in. Everybody needs to be aware of that we are trying as much as humanly possible to avoid such escalations, but that can only be done through facts and conversation.